So I had lunch with Tom this week. You know Tom, he's preached here a few times, and I went right after I had some cavities done, which is a very bad idea to go eat lunch like immediately following the drillings, specifically the numbings, as the left side of my face was just didn't know existed, and the right side was quite alive. And we went to Tijuana Flats, which, look, save your money, go Taco Bell. But we went to Tijuana Flats, and I got the big burritos, stuffed it full, double chicken, double cheese, and a chicken quesadilla. Because if you can't feel your mouth, what does it matter? Just eat it all. But I warned Tom ahead of time. I said, look, this was coming out. My face is numb, so whatever comes out of my mouth, I am not responsible for, be it words or food or anything else. And sure enough, throughout the lunchtime, I said, that one landed in your drink. But hey, but the problem was, I had a feeling I was eating more than food. This is getting really kind of personal, I know, but I said to Tom, I think I'm eating my lip, but I just don't know it, so I'll just continue, and I'll find out later. Sure enough, the next day is like chunks missing, and it was, damage was being done, and I had no idea. And, it just made me think, we're called to the renewal of our mind. And as a child of God, you're open to the teachings of God, and the renewal of your mind can take place in good teaching and in bad teaching. Our sign out there, a hospital for saints. I just want to let you know, my only agenda this morning is to bring you the gospel, and that is it, as best and holy that I can do, which for some of you will be healing for damage that maybe you didn't know has been caused in your mind through other teaching. And I say this because if you're newer here and you don't have a compartment for the gospel as John gives it to you, which is the gospel of Christ in you, there'll be a little bit of wrestling with what you'll hear. And the question is, what is that wrestling? And I encourage you just to go home and ask God to show you more. The Spirit of truth is that, the Spirit of truth. And He will reveal to you truth, and just ask God to know it and to see it. Last week, we had a very depressing sermon of people hating us. Well, it's not depressing because Jesus, apparently it was important for these guys to know that because they loved Jesus and Jesus called them and chose them out of the world, that the world would hate them. And we pick up in chapter 16, verse 4, right after this conversation in our reading today. You can follow along on the screen. Jesus said, "But I have said these things to you, that when their hour comes, you may remember that I told them to you. I did not say these things to you from the beginning because I was with you. But now I am going to Him who sent me, and none of you asked me, 'Where are you going?' But because I have said these things to you, sorrow has filled your heart. Nevertheless, I tell you the truth, it is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you. But if I go, I will send Him to you. And when He comes, He will convict the world concerning sin and righteousness and judgment. Concerning sin, because they do not believe in me. Concerning righteousness, because I go to the Father, and you will see me no longer. Concerning judgment, because the ruler of this world is judged." So we back up in chapter 15, as I already have mentioned, and we see the conversation where Jesus tells His disciples, look, the world is going to hate you. And then the surprising news is in chapter 16, verse 2, they will put you out of the synagogues. Indeed, the hour is coming when whoever kills you will think he is offering service to God, so that some of these that you will have friction with, some of these people, some of your relationships, some of who you will be persecuted by, will be those in the place of worship, thinking they are doing a service for God by hushing you up. And then verse 3, which I think, this is where it's not depressing to me. I mean, although, yeah, I would love to be on a good place in relationships with people. But verse 3 puts my heart at ease if I was to encounter this. It says, and they will do these things because they have not known the Father nor me. So Jesus says to his disciples, look, understand this. If you are hated because you love me, know that those who are hating you do not know my Father. And they do not know me. They're acting out of their ignorance. They're acting out of a relationship that is devoid of love. No relationship with the lover himself. In fact, hate would probably be a good word to summarize those who don't know the Father, because the Father is love. Remember last week, we said several times, they're just people needing to be rescued that don't know the Father. Well, how will they know the Father? How will they know Jesus? I mean, this is where Jesus now turns the conversation. He lets them know, look, you're going to be hated by the world. And by the way, it's the world I'm sending you to so they can know the Father and know love. They can know me and know love. And then verse 4, but I have said these things to you, that when their hour comes, you may remember that I told them to you. Well, go back to verse 1, chapter 16. It's not on the screen. Jesus also says, I have said all these things to you to keep you from falling away. There's power in the words of Jesus. Verse 1 shows us that Jesus says to his disciples that the world will hate you in order to guard them. Chapter 17, we'll see Jesus doesn't lose a single one of those who are called to him. So somehow his words guard you from falling away. And it's when the hour comes, when your hour comes, that you face persecution. You will now remember what Jesus said this was going to happen. And that keeps you and guards you. But I've said these things, verse 4, to you, that when their hour comes. Now, that word there, I kind of get hung up on in a good way. When their hour comes, what is their hour? Well, I can only speculate because Jesus doesn't explain their hour, but I speculate because of what we read in verses 5 through 11, their hour of salvation. But when their hour comes, and I believe what Jesus is referring to, their hour of new life. Now listen, you may remember that I told them to you. What? These words that they were going to hate you. When those who don't know the Father nor the Son, let me put it in different words, when all they have to live by is their old life, their old self, their flesh, their only self, comes into contact with the gospel of Jesus Christ, there will be some who wrestle with it. It will cause friction. It will cause a collision within them because they are now faced with good news, new news, that this is not on them. That their salvation, knowing God, is not on them. And for some, picture the soldier at the cross. As Jesus breathes his last breath, hated by that man, comes to his hour. My God. He was the Son of God. And this is what Jesus is telling his disciples. Look, their hour will come, and it may be at your final breath. That their new life begins. In other words, if you encounter someone that seems to hate you because the gospel is coming out of you and they're feeling convicted and they push back on you, think this: their hour of salvation may be at hand. Why do the disciples, if this is the accurate interpretation, why do the disciples need to know this? Because that will guard them as they withstand the blows of the persecution and continue to deliver the gospel of good news to people who need it. You're on the front lines of evil. God has called you up to deliver light into darkness. And it's even your children will take a beating for it. But we got to read on, because there's a promise in here. It says, I did not say these things to you from the beginning because I was with you. So this is new information for these disciples. Because Jesus wore the target. It would be him that would be on the cross. He took the blows. He took the persecution. And his disciples watched the entire time. But now I'm going to him who sent me. And none of you asked me, where are you going? I'll just clean this up a little bit, because chapter 13, Peter does ask him where he's going. Thomas says, show us the way. Philip says, show us the Father in chapter 14. So that night, there was questions about where you're going. And just for the sake of not confusing you, I believe Jesus is talking about this conversation right here. But because I've said these things to you, sorrow has filled your heart. See, I think they're getting it. He won't be around much longer. I don't know if they're getting the fact that he's going to be crucified, but I do think they're understanding we're losing our best friend. And if when I was in college, I had a roommate for a year, and then we went our separate ways, and we got back together. But he's someone that I still stay in contact to this day. And in fact, oftentimes I say, Becca, the only thing I really want for my birthday is to go and be with my buddy from Mississippi. Because he's a guy that I can be around and be myself. And just total relax and rest in his presence. And Jesus being in him is probably a picture of how Jesus was with these guys. They were able to be themselves. Thomas, Jesus, I'll believe you when you show me the scars. The questions they asked showed that they were relaxed around their Savior. John laying in the lap of Jesus. The conversation they have at the Last Supper about the betrayer. The friendship ran deep. And I believe they're getting it at this point. Something big is going to happen to him. His sorrow is filling their heart. Verse 7, nevertheless, I tell you the truth. It is to your advantage that I go away. For if I do not go away, the Helper will not come to you. So Jesus says, I got to leave you. Because there's a greater benefit for me being gone than me being present. And that's the Helper will come to you. Now don't miss this verse as we move forward. He says, if I leave you, I can send you the Helper. Apparently, he could not send the Helper in that human form he was in. possibly because he has not gone to the Father yet and paid for the sins of the disciples and carried that punishment. But he says, I will send him to you. Remember verse 4. Let's go back to verse 4 real quick. But I've said these things to you that when their hour comes, you may remember that I told them to you. And now verse 8. And when he comes, he will convict the world concerning sin, righteousness, and judgment. I'm going to stop at this word world and just hone in on this. And we will pick up those 3 words next week. I have a feeling that will be a very enlightening message. But notice what the Spirit is going to do. He will come to the disciples at the mouth and the spoken command of Jesus. The Spirit will go. Jesus commands the Spirit. He goes to the disciples and he goes to you and to me. And he will convict the world. Now just real quick, sin, righteousness, and judgment. In other words, bring new life to those who are predestined and chosen to be children of God. We went out to a marching band thing last night, me and my wife and my daughter. I don't personally stress out about evangelizing to people when I'm out in public. My mentality is when that time comes, God will call me to it. And last night, just as an example, we didn't know where we were going to go for dinner, and so I know what Anna would choose, but since me and my wife couldn't choose, we asked Anna, what do you want for dinner? Oh, McDonald's. Okay, we asked you. You made it. That's what you want. Therefore, we'll go to McDonald's. And after 4 tries at my double quarter pounder, they finally got it right, and you guys are about done eating. And I was sitting there by myself, and the young manager came out, and she just had a look on her face, and she went and she started talking to what appeared to be 4 homeless guys that she probably knew, and she just poured out her soul to them, man. It's just been long, rough few weeks. And in the midst of her pouring out her soul, I overheard her state a need she had, which was something that I could fulfill at that moment, and did so. And later she came up to me, because I just walked away. I don't like to be caught up in the middle of that drama, but I helped her out and moved on. And she came, found me, and gave me a hug, said thank you, and God loves you, and that's about all I could get out of my mouth, and moved on. And later I thought, my daughter directed us to go there, but yet it wasn't really my daughter. The Spirit of God within me and my family moved us to a point where this lady needed help, and He provided the means. And it's the moment you hear of the need for help, and that the voice of God inside you says help, and you can't resist but to help. I've been thinking a lot about the Great Commission. Go therefore and make disciples. It's quite the burden, man. I don't know how that verse sits with you. But for years, I carried that as bondage, or not bondage, but it was heavy on my shoulders. Because I really wanted to make disciples. And wasn't fulfilling what I thought was my quota. Which would cause me to ask questions, which probably the number one question I hear amongst you all Christians is, what is the will of God in my life? Am I missing it? I want to be doing this. And usually in that question is wrapped up, well, I think He's calling me to ministry, as if I'm in ministry, I will be able to fulfill this Great Commission better. And if you're asking that question, what is the will of God for my life? What is it that He is asking me and calling me to do? You don't need to ask that question anymore. Because you're caught in two worlds, in two lives. You're caught between the old self and the new self. And what I am showing you through John is that the gospel is Christ in you. His Spirit is your spirit. The Father's Spirit is your spirit. There's not a difference of spirits in your new life than the spirit that is in God. And we'll see this in John 17, that you all are one with God because of the Spirit. To ask that question, what is the will of God in my life, is to overlook the new life and what is governing it. And the Great Commission is, this is a pivotal verse in how it's taught, especially that two-letter word, go. Let's go Matthew 28. Start at verse 16. Now the reason I bring this up is because these disciples, John gives you a different Great Commission. In fact, the commission is not even mentioned in John. This word go it shows up in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, but not John. John, we are seeing this week and next week the workings of the Great Commission. He will convict the world of sin, righteousness, and judgment. He will. The Spirit of God in you, the vehicle in which will carry and manifest the Spirit of God, will do this. And you know, many of you know this, because the moment you mention God in a sentence, everything changes. Language cleans up, conviction. You can almost see the conviction fall upon people. That's not you. That's the Spirit of God in you. That is the revelation of your new life. When you see people become convicted around you. Throw out the word pastor. And I'll tell you, people change big time to avoid what they believe will be the conviction they will feel come from me. But look at this. Now let's watch this. Each line. Now the 11 disciples went to Galilee. They did what? What's that verb? They went. Okay. All right. They went to Galilee. Why did they go? To the mountain which Jesus had directed them. All right, let's really quick. Let's pick that apart. Pretty obvious what happened. Jesus said, after His resurrection, Jesus looks at His 11 disciples, He says, go to this mountain. And they go. Look, man, Jesus, the creator of the world, when He commands the waves and the seas to be still, they don't argue, they be still. He commands the stars and the sun and the moon to hang perfectly in place, and guess what happens? They're right where they're supposed to be. And so when He tells His 11 disciples to go to a mountain, guess what's going to happen? All 11 will be at that mountain. And look at the state of some of them. And when they saw Him, they worshiped Him, but some doubted. And so here we are, the 11 disciples sitting on this mountain. Sure, it's a little bit bigger than this. And just the sight of Jesus caused two different reactions. Worship, which is a declaration that He is the Son of God, and doubt. And so all 11 made it to that mountain, even though in the hearts of some, there was doubt that was revealed when Jesus showed up. I find this interesting because what happens is when we doubt, it's easy to believe that you've stepped outside the will of God because of your doubting. But the Spirit of God is not contingent upon what you do, it's contingent upon what God tells it to do. And even the 11 disciples, if half of them were doubting, they still made it to that mountain. Because the command of Jesus was get to the mountain. And they couldn't resist. In fact, there was one that's not on that mountain, the betrayer, who could not recognize the voice of the shepherd. But the other 11, they hear the voice of the shepherd, and they go. So I just want to point this out as we move forward. And Jesus came and said to them, all authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. So, okay, let's just make sure we understand where we're at. There's the 11 disciples. Some worshipped and some are doubting. And Jesus walks up to them. Now, let's just role play real quick. All right, I'm Jesus, and you're those 11. And you're on this mountain. And you're the doubting side, and you're the worshiping side. Walks up. I don't see, hey, Thomas, how you doing? Man, scar's healing pretty good. No. All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. When my mom or my dad told me to do something as a child and I disobeyed, let me tell you how hard it was for me to disobey. It took active effort to disobey my mom and dad. When the creator of the universe speaks, I don't believe I'll be able to disobey him, especially when he has all authority in heaven and on earth. Why is he saying? He's establishing this next verb. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go. Therefore. He is rooting this word go in his authority. Now, in case you missed it, they did pretty well at making disciples. Just look around the room. You are here because God spoke the word into them to make disciples. But this word go, this is critical. It's not an imperative. It's not an imperative. This is a aorist passive participle. I got the podium because I'm a little outside of my realm right now. So let me tell you the book I got this from. Michael Heiser. Ready for this? Glossary of Morphosyntactic Database Terminology. The kind of books I read for fun. And here's the definition of a passive verb. The subject is being acted upon. The subject is the receiver of the verbal action. Who's the subject? The 11 disciples. They are being acted upon, and they are receiving the verbal action. I don't want to pretend I know more than I know, but I feel as if they don't really have a choice with this word go and the way Jesus. Now in the Greek, we have our word go, and it could be imperative, it could be it could be an action verb, passive verb, and it looks like go. But there are different forms in the Greek for the word go to represent its tense. And so this word go shows up 15 times in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. That is it, 15 times in this form. Every one of those times, it is the fulfillment of a command. Go and tell John everything you've seen and heard. Go and tell that fox. They went and did as he directed. In fact, Matthew 21:6. Let me give you an example of this. The disciples went. That word went. Exact same Greek word. Same tense, same everything. The disciples went and did as Jesus had directed them. Here's what I'm trying to lay out to you. Right? John is showing you how the Great Commission works inside of you. John is revealing the workings of how Jesus builds his church through you. And this word go is worded perfectly to reveal what Jesus said. It was the night he was going to be betrayed. That Jesus said he will convict the world. And 40 days later, go now and fulfill what the Spirit will be doing in you. Let me simplify this. Go and live your life. And the Spirit of God will convict those of sin, of righteousness, and judgment through you. Go live your life. You do not need to ask the question, what is the will of God for my life? He's speaking it loud and clear. Be still and know that I am God. And you can learn to hear God's voice in you. The same Spirit that spoke to Jesus the words that the Father said to him to speak. What does Jesus say? I have to speak what the Father tells me to speak. Those words are in you. And you will. So I bring this up to put some of you at rest. The Father will complete His work in you, and He will convict the world. When their hour has come of sin, righteousness, and judgment, which we will look at next week. Go therefore. Oh, one more thing about the passive. Let me finish this definition here. A verb in the passive voice with God as the stated or implied agent is often referred to as the divine passive. This would be called a divine passive. The agent is God Himself. And you're being acted upon. But just a few hours after telling His disciples about how this is all going to take place in this world, that the Spirit of God will do this convicting, they found their friend, and their brother hanging on a cross. Wally, grab the youngsters. And they had to reconcile. I mean, I don't blame some of them for doubting. What did they doubt? Is this really what we want to commit our life to? We just witnessed something that took place 40 days ago. He was beaten, bloodied. He died for the very message He wants us to go out and deliver. And even in that doubt, they went. I love that. Even in their doubt, they were still compelled to go. He didn't address their doubts. He didn't talk down to them because some doubted. In His authority, He commanded the new life in them to go. That word go literally means set in motion. Wally was just acted upon, by the way. I set him in motion in the same manner that you have been set in motion, because the new life in you is the Spirit of God. It is a joy, and it is freeing to be able to go out and live the life God has called you to, trusting and knowing that He will fulfill His purpose in you. And some of you are called to a daily interaction with people in which you share the gospel. And others are called to do that which God has brought you to, be it engineering or cutting grass or stay-at-home mom. And He puts you right in that position for a very specific person and purpose. Just like our little McDonald's episode last night. He called me and my family, to a place through my 4-year-old. Because someone needed help. And there was no arguing with them. There was no, I don't want to do this. It was a command that was set forth in my new life.